My parents sued me for refusing to fund my sister's business after I sold my home. They thought my money belonged to the family. But when the case reached court, the truth about their demands came out and their plan unraveled in front of everyone. After 6 years of saving every penny, working double shifts at Memorial Hospital, and living on ramen noodles more nights than I care to count, I finally did it. I sold my apartment. You have to understand what this meant to me. Growing up, money was always tight. My parents fought about bills constantly, and I watched my mom cry over past due notices, more times than any kid should. My dad would disappear for days when the pressure got too much, leaving us wondering if he'd ever come back. That chaos taught me one thing. Financial independence wasn't just a goal. It was survival. When I turned 22 and got my nursing license, I scraped together enough for a down payment on a tiny one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much. Barely 650 feet with a leaky faucet and neighbors who played music too loud. But it was mine. Every month I'd stare at that mortgage statement and feel this incredible mix of pride and terror. Pride because I was doing something my parents never managed to do, and terror because one missed payment could destroy everything I'd worked for. The real estate agent Monica called me at the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon. "Lily, you're not going to believe this, but we got an offer for $185,000. Cash buyer, no contingencies." I had to sit down in the break room. I'd bought the place for $127,000 6 years ago, and with all the improvements I'd made, new flooring, updated kitchen, fresh paint throughout, it had appraised for exactly what they were offering. After paying off the remaining mortgage and all the fees, I walked away with $94,500 in my checking account. It was more money than I'd ever seen at once in my entire life. That night, I sat in my empty apartment with Chinese takeout, staring at my bank balance on my phone screen. For the first time since I could remember, I felt like I could breathe. Really breathe. I had plans for that money. Real plans, not dreams or wishes, but actual researched investment strategies. I'd been looking at a duplex on the other side of town. I could live in one unit and rent out the other. The rental income would cover most of the mortgage, and I'd be building equity while having someone else pay for it. It was perfect. My family knew about the sale, of course. I'd told them during our monthly dinner at Mom's house the week before. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom had said, though something in her voice seemed off. Dad just nodded and changed the subject to something about his job at the warehouse. My younger sister Rose barely looked up from her phone. I should have known then that something was coming. My family never just let good news sit quietly. There was always an angle, always a way to complicate things. But I was so focused on my future, so proud of what I'd accomplished on my own, that I missed all the warning signs. The money sat in my savings account for exactly 2 weeks before everything went completely insane. 2 weeks after the sale closed, I got a text from Rose at 9 p.m. on a Friday. "Family meeting tomorrow at 2. Important business opportunity. Don't be late." I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. Rose had never shown interest in business anything. She was 24, still living at home with a degree in visual arts that she'd barely used since graduating 2 years ago. While I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for nursing school, Rose was taking pottery classes and spending summers backpacking through Europe with money from Mom and Dad. Saturday afternoon, I walked into my childhood home to find Rose standing in front of an easel with poster boards covered in magazine cutouts and printed photos. She was wearing a flowy dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair perfectly styled even though it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekend. Finally, she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Lily, you're going to love this. I figured out my calling." Mom and Dad sat on the couch looking at Rose like she was about to announce she'd won the lottery. This was nothing new. Rose had always been their golden child, the creative one, the one with potential. I was just the practical daughter who paid her own bills. "I'm opening an art gallery," Rose announced, flipping to her first poster board. "Not just any gallery, a boutique space in the arts district downtown. I've already found the perfect location." The poster board was covered with pictures of galleries from art magazines, all sleek white walls and dramatic lighting. Rose had cut out photos of expensive-looking sculptures and paintings, pasting them around images of well-dressed people holding wine glasses. "Rose, that's wonderful," Mom gushed. "Tell us more about your business plan." Rose launched into what she clearly thought was a professional presentation. She'd researched rental prices for gallery spaces. The one she wanted was $8,000 a month. She needed money for renovations to create the right aesthetic. Then there was inventory. She planned to feature local artists, but only after curating a collection of established pieces to draw people in. The thing is, Rose continued her voice, taking on that wheedling tone I remembered from childhood when she wanted something. This kind of opportunity doesn't wait. The space I want has 3 other people interested. I need to move fast. Dad leaned forward. How much are we talking about total? For the first year, including rent renovations, initial inventory insurance, and marketing. I need $120,000. Rose said this like she was ordering a sandwich, completely casual about an amount of money that would take me 3 years to save. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. Honey, that's a lot of money, Dad said carefully. But it's an investment in my future, Rose insisted. And it's not like I'm asking for charity. This gallery will be profitable within 6 months. I've done the research. She flipped to another poster board showing a hand-drawn chart with projected profits that seemed to climb straight up like a rocket ship. Her market research consisted of Googling successful galleries and assuming she'd immediately capture their client base. The art market is booming, Rose explained. People with money are always looking for the next big thing. I have an eye for talent. I can spot pieces that will appreciate in value. I watched this whole presentation feeling like I was in some alternate reality. Rose had never sold anything in her life, had never managed a budget, had never dealt with difficult customers or handled inventory or navigated business regulations. Yet, here she was absolutely convinced she was the next big thing in the art world. The scary part wasn't Rose's delusion. It was the way Mom and Dad were looking at her like they were already convinced this was going to work. The following weekend, Mom called and asked if I could come over Sunday for a family financial discussion. Her voice had that careful, measured tone she used when she was about to ask me for something I wouldn't want to give. When I arrived, I found the dining room set up like a boardroom. Rose had printed out official-looking documents complete with charts and graphs. Dad had his reading glasses on, studying papers like he was reviewing a corporate merger instead of his unemployed daughter's fantasy business plan. Lily, sit down, Mom said, gesturing to the chair across from Rose. We need to talk about this gallery opportunity seriously. Rose had clearly spent the entire week preparing. Her business plan was now a 20-page document with sections on market analysis, competitive landscape, and financial projections. She'd researched everything from gallery insurance costs to the average price of wine for opening receptions. The location is perfect. Rose began sliding a printed map across the table. It's right in the heart of the arts district, walking distance from 3 trendy restaurants and that new boutique hotel. The foot traffic alone will bring in customers. Dad nodded approvingly. The demographics look good too. Young professionals, tourists with disposable income. I picked up the rental agreement Rose had somehow obtained. $8,000 a month for a space that's barely 1/200th of a foot. Prime real estate costs money, Rose replied defensively. You can't build a high-end brand in some strip mall. Mom spread out the financial projections. According to Rose's calculations, the gallery would break even by month 8 and start turning a serious profit by month 12. Her projected sales figures were based on selling just 2 major pieces per month at an average price of $3,500 each, plus smaller items and commissions from featured artists. Where are you getting these price points? I asked, scanning the numbers. Market research, Rose said, pulling out printouts from art auction websites. Original paintings by emerging artists in similar markets sell for anywhere from $1,500 to $8,000. I'm being conservative. What she wasn't mentioning was that those prices were from established galleries with years of reputation and client relationships. She was comparing herself to businesses that had been operating successfully for decades. Dad cleared his throat. The thing is, Lily, we've been talking and we don't have $120,000 just sitting around. We could get a home equity loan, Mom added quickly, but that would put the house at risk if something went wrong. I saw where this was heading and felt my chest tighten. However, Dad continued, this is a family opportunity. Rose's success would benefit all of us. Rose leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. Think about it, Lily. When the gallery takes off, you'd be an investor. You'd get returns on your money, plus you'd be supporting local artists and culture. The timing is perfect, Mom added. You just sold your apartment, so you have liquid capital available. I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. You want me to invest my apartment money in Rose's gallery? Not all of it, Rose said quickly. Just the initial startup costs. Once we're established, we can get business loans for expansion. Just $120,000, I repeated. Just everything I've worked 6 years to save. It's not like you're throwing the money away, Dad argued. This is an investment in your sister's future and potentially a very profitable one for you too. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Rose was practically vibrating with excitement. Mom had that hopeful expression she used to get when she bought lottery tickets. Dad was nodding like this all made perfect sense. Not one of them seemed to understand that they were asking me to risk everything I'd worked for on a business plan that wouldn't pass a freshman economics class. I took a deep breath, and set Rose's business plan down on the table. I'm not investing in the gallery. The silence that followed was deafening. Rose's face went from excited to confused to hurt in about 3 seconds. What do you mean, Mom asked. I mean exactly what I said. I'm not giving Rose $120,000 to open an art gallery, but this is a real opportunity, Rose protested. I've done all the research. The numbers work. Rose, you've never run a business. You've never even held a job for more than 6 months. You have no experience in retail, no connections in the art world, and no backup plan if this fails. Dad frowned. That's pretty harsh, Lily. Everyone has to start somewhere. Starting somewhere usually doesn't involve risking 6 figures of someone else's money. Rose's eyes were filling with tears. I can't believe you won't support your own sister's dreams. I support your dreams, but I won't fund your delusions. Do you know what happens to most new businesses? 80% fail within the first year. Art galleries have an even higher failure rate. Those are just statistics. Mom interjected. Rose isn't like other people. She has a real eye for art. Having an eye for art and running a profitable business are completely different things. Rose, have you ever dealt with suppliers, managed inventory, handled customer complaints, filed business taxes? Rose crossed her arms defensively. I can learn all that stuff with my money as your safety net if you can't. It's not just your money, Dad said, his voice getting sharp. You're part of this family. Sometimes family members help each other out. I felt that familiar anger rising in my chest. The same feeling I'd had growing up when they'd give Rose everything she wanted while telling me I needed to be more responsible, help each other out. Dad, when I was in nursing school working 2 jobs to pay tuition, did anyone in this family offer to help? When I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner to make my apartment payments, did anyone offer to help? I've been helping myself for 6 years, and now that I've finally gotten ahead, you want me to hand it all over. That's different. Mom said you chose a practical career. You were always going to be fine. I'm fine because I made sacrifices because I worked 70-hour weeks and lived in a tiny apartment and drove a car with 200,000 meters on it. Rose has been living here rent-free for 2 years while I've been building my life. Rose was crying now. So you're punishing me for being creative instead of boring. I'm not punishing you. I'm refusing to enable you. If this gallery is such a sure thing, get a business loan. We tried. Dad admitted the bank wants collateral and business experience. Rose doesn't qualify. Then maybe that's the market telling you something. Or maybe it's just a system that doesn't support innovative young entrepreneurs. Rose shot back. I stood up from the table. This conversation is over. I'm not investing in the gallery and I'm not changing my mind. Lily, wait. Mom called as I headed for the door. Don't you think you're being a little selfish? I turned back to face them. Selfish, I worked 6 years to save this money. I have plans for it. Real plans that will secure my future. And you think I'm selfish for not handing it over to fund Rose's midlife crisis art project? It's not a midlife crisis, Rose sobbed. It's my passion. Then find a way to fund your passion that doesn't involve bankrupting your sister. I walked out of that house knowing I'd just started a war. What followed was the most exhausting month of my life. My family launched a coordinated campaign that would have impressed military strategists. It started with the guilt trips. Mom called me at work 3 times the first week, crying about how Rose was devastated and how I was crushing her dreams. She'd launch into stories about how Rose had always been such a sensitive, artistic child, and how this gallery was her chance to finally find her place in the world. You don't understand what rejection does to creative people. Mom sobbed into the phone during my lunch break on Tuesday. Rose hasn't eaten in 2 days. She's talking about giving up art entirely. Dad took a different approach. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, usually around dinner time with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. Then he'd sit at my kitchen table and explain very patiently why I was making a mistake. Look, kiddo, I get it. You worked hard for that money, but sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead. This gallery could make you a lot more than you'd earn from safe investments. Dad, I'm buying a duplex. That's not exactly a risky investment. Real estate is risky too. What if the market crashes? What if you can't find tenants? At least with Rose's gallery, you'd be diversifying. When logic didn't work, they brought in reinforcements. My Aunt Patricia, who I barely spoke to twice a year, called to tell me how disappointed she was in my selfishness. My cousin Jake, Rose's childhood friend, sent me a long Facebook message about how I was destroying family unity over money. Rose herself alternated between heartbroken victim and righteous artist. She'd text me articles about successful galleries, screenshots of positive comments from her art school friends, and long voice messages where she cried about how I was the only thing standing between her and her dreams. The manipulation reached peak intensity during week 3. I came home from a particularly brutal 12-hour shift to find my entire family in my living room. They'd gotten my spare key from the landlord, by claiming there was a family emergency. "Intervention time," Rose announced, gesturing to the coffee table covered with printed testimonials from gallery owners, investment guides, and what appeared to be a petition signed by various family members and friends. "This is insane," I said, dropping my purse by the door. "You can't just break into my apartment." "We're not breaking in," Mom corrected. "We're having a family meeting." Dad held up a folder. "We've prepared some additional information that might change your mind." The additional information included a revised business plan with even more optimistic projections, letters of intent from 3 local artists promising to show their work at Rose's gallery, and a photocopy of an article about a gallery in Portland that had sold a painting for $50,000 in its first year. "See?" Rose said, pointing to the article. "This gallery started with almost no money, and look where they are now." I read the article. The gallery had been open for 8 years and was run by someone with 15 years of experience in art curation. "Rose, this person worked at major galleries in New York before opening her own place. You can't even balance your checkbook. That's mean." Mom said Rose is very capable. If she's so capable, why does she need my money? That's when Rose played her trump card. She started sobbing. Not just crying, but full-body sobs that shook the entire couch. "I can't believe my own sister hates me this much," she wailed. "All I want is a chance to build something beautiful, to contribute something meaningful to the world, and you want to destroy that because you care more about money than family." It was a masterful performance. Mom immediately went to comfort her. Dad glared at me like I just kicked a puppy. Even I felt a moment of doubt, but then I remembered all the times Rose had manipulated situations to get her way. All the promises she'd broken, all the responsibilities she'd avoided while I worked my ass off to build a stable life. "Get out," I said quietly. "Lily." Mom started. I said, "Get out, all of you." Now they left, but the siege continued through texts, emails, and surprise visits for another week until I finally had to block their numbers and change my locks. The silence lasted exactly 1 week. Then I got served with legal papers at the hospital. I was in the middle of checking vitals on Mrs. Anderson in room 312 when a process server appeared at the door. "Lily Thompson, that's me. You're being served." He handed me a thick manila envelope and walked away, leaving me standing there with Mrs. Anderson staring at me curiously. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope in the break room 10 minutes later. The lawsuit was filed by my parents with Rose listed as a co-plaintiff. The title read, "Civil Action for Breach of Family Financial Obligations and Unjust Enrichment." I had to read it 3 times before I understood what they were claiming. According to their lawyer, I owed my family a portion of my apartment sale proceeds because I had lived with them until age 19 and had therefore benefited from their financial support during my formative years. They argued that my current success was built on their investment in my education and upbringing, making them entitled to a share of any profits I derived from property they had helped make possible. The legal language was dense, but the basic argument was that I was committing unjust enrichment by keeping money that rightfully belonged to the family unit. They were seeking $120,000 in damages, exactly the amount Rose needed for her gallery. But the part that really made my blood boil was their claim that I was violating established family financial solidarity principles and causing severe emotional and financial distress to Rose by refusing to support her business venture. They had actually taken me to court for saying no. I called in sick for the rest of my shift and spent the afternoon researching family law attorneys. The first 3 I called wanted retainers I couldn't afford. The 4th, Marcus Rodriguez, agreed to meet with me that evening. Marcus had a small office above a dry cleaner, but his credentials were solid. He specialized in family business disputes and had handled several cases involving financial conflicts between relatives. "I've seen this before," he said, scanning the lawsuit. "Desperate families sometimes file frivolous lawsuits hoping to pressure someone into settling. The legal claims here are pretty weak. Weak, how well? They're arguing that living with your parents until 19 created some kind of financial obligation. That's not how the law works. Parents have a legal obligation to support minor children, not the other way around. And even if you had received some benefit, you'd have to prove that benefit was given with the expectation of future repayment." He flipped through the pages. "They're also claiming emotional damages for your refusal to invest in your sister's business. That's essentially trying to sue you for making a personal financial decision they don't like. So this will get thrown out probably, but you still have to defend against it. And frivolous or not, lawsuits are expensive and stressful. Your family is counting on that pressure to make you give in." Marcus quoted me a retainer of $5,000, which would cover the initial response and hopefully get the case dismissed quickly. If it went to trial, costs could climb to $20,000 or more. "There's something else you should know," Marcus said as I was leaving. "I looked up your parents' attorney. He's not exactly top tier. This feels like someone who is willing to file questionable paperwork for a quick fee." That night, I sat in my empty apartment calculating costs. The legal defense would eat into my duplex down payment, but I couldn't let my family bully me through the court system. I called Marcus the next morning and hired him. The strangest part was how betrayed I felt. I'd expected manipulation and guilt trips from my family. That was nothing new. But taking me to court accusing me of stealing money that was never theirs, that crossed a line I never thought they'd cross. As I signed the retainer agreement, I realized this wasn't just about Rose's gallery anymore. This was about whether I was going to let my family control my life forever or finally set boundaries that meant something. They had escalated this fight to a place where someone was going to lose everything. I intended to make sure it wasn't me. Marcus wasn't kidding when he said building a defense would be thorough. Over the next 2 months, we gathered every financial document from my adult life to prove my independence and self-sufficiency. I had to dig up bank statements from my first checking account at 19, showing deposits from my part-time job at a medical supply store while I was in nursing school. We documented every tuition payment I'd made, every rent check, every car payment. Marcus wanted to create an ironclad timeline showing that I'd supported myself from the moment I left home. The stronger we can make your independence case, the more ridiculous their claims look, he explained during one of our weekly meetings. What surprised me was how much evidence I had. I'd always been careful about keeping records, but seeing it all laid out was eye-opening. In 6 years, I'd paid over $180,000 in living expenses, tuition, and apartment costs entirely on my own. The only financial help I'd ever received from my parents was letting me live at home until 19, something millions of parents do without expecting repayment. The most interesting discovery came when Marcus subpoenaed my parents' financial records as part of discovery. It turned out they'd taken out a $35,000 personal loan to fund Rose's legal case and her attempted gallery opening. "They're more desperate than I thought," Marcus said, reviewing the bank statements. "They've already borrowed money against their house to pay for this lawsuit and give Rose startup capital." While we built our case, I watched Rose's gallery dreams play out in real time through social media. Despite not having my investment, she'd convinced my parents to fund a scaled-down version of her business plan. Instead of the prime arts district location, she rented a narrow storefront in a strip mall 20 minutes from downtown. The monthly rent was $2,400 instead of $8,000, but the foot traffic was essentially non-existent. The space had been a used bookstore, and Rose spent weeks trying to transform it into something resembling a proper gallery. Her Instagram posts documented the process. Photos of her painting walls, white assembling track lighting from a home improvement store, and arranging mismatched furniture she'd bought secondhand. She was trying so hard to create an upscale atmosphere in a space that would never support it. The grand opening happened on a Thursday evening in October. I didn't attend, obviously, but Rose posted dozens of photos. The event looked pathetic, maybe 15 people total, most of them family friends who'd come out of obligation. The artwork was a collection of pieces from local community college students and a few landscapes Rose had bought from online galleries. Within a month, it was clear the gallery was failing. Rose's social media posts went from excited business owner to increasingly desperate sales pitches. She started offering special discounts and limited time promotions on pieces that weren't selling. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Rose struggled to attract customers to her poorly located gallery, I was house hunting with a pre-approved loan and a clear investment strategy. The duplex I'd been eyeing was still available, and the rental market in that neighborhood was strong enough to cover most of my mortgage payments. Marcus kept me updated on the legal front. My parents' attorney had tried several procedural moves to drag out the case, probably hoping the mounting legal costs would force me to settle, but Marcus was prepared for these tactics. "They're fishing," he explained. "They know their case is weak, so they're hoping something in discovery will give them leverage." The discovery process was invasive, but ultimately worked in our favor. Every document we produced supported our narrative. I was a financially independent adult who'd worked hard for everything I owned. Meanwhile, their financial records painted a picture of parents who'd overextended themselves to fund both Rose's business venture and a frivolous lawsuit. They'd borrowed against their house, maxed out credit cards, and taken personal loans, all to avoid accepting that their adult daughter had made a reasonable decision not to fund her sister's risky business idea. 3 months after being served, I felt more confident about the legal case than I did about my family relationships. The lawsuit had destroyed any possibility of reconciliation, but it had also clarified something important. These people were willing to try to destroy my financial security to get what they wanted. That realization made me more determined than ever to win. The trial was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in February, 8 months after the initial lawsuit was filed. I took the day off work and met Marcus at the courthouse at 8 a.m. to prep for what he promised would be a straightforward hearing. "This is essentially a motion to dismiss with oral arguments," he explained as we walked through security. The judge will hear both sides and decide whether their claims have any legal merit. If we're right about this being frivolous, it should be over quickly. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with maybe 30 seats for observers. My parents and Rose were already there with their attorney, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Rose had dressed for the occasion in what I assumed was her version of professional attire, a black dress with dramatic jewelry that looked more appropriate for an art gallery opening than a courtroom. Mom wore her church dress, and Dad had on the same suit he'd worn to my nursing school graduation. Judge Patricia Chen called the case at 9:15 a.m. My parents' attorney, William Garrett, stood first to present their case. Your Honor, this is a matter of family financial justice. The defendant benefited for 19 years from her parents' investment in her housing, education, and development. She lived rent-free, received meals, utilities, and family support that enabled her to save money and eventually purchase real estate. Garrett argued that my success was built on a foundation my parents had provided, making them entitled to a share of the profits. He claimed that my refusal to help Rose constituted bad faith dealing within a family financial partnership. The plaintiff's daughter needs $120,000 to start a legitimate business venture that would benefit the entire family unit. The defendant's refusal to provide these funds, despite having the means to do so, represents a breach of the implicit family support agreement that existed during her formative years. Judge Chen looked skeptical. Are you arguing that adult children have a legal obligation to financially support their siblings' business ventures? We're arguing that in this specific case, given the family's history of mutual support and the defendant's ability to pay her refusal constitutes unjust enrichment. It was Marcus's turn. He stood and immediately cut to the heart of the matter. Your Honor, this lawsuit is an attempt to force an adult woman to make an investment she has every right to refuse. The plaintiff is essentially arguing that because they fulfilled their legal obligation to house and feed their minor child, that child now owes them money 25 years later. Marcus presented our timeline of my financial independence, showing the judge documentation of every payment I'd made since leaving home. Ms. Thompson has been completely self-sufficient for 6 years. She worked multiple jobs to pay for nursing school, saved diligently to purchase her apartment, and maintained that property through her own income. The proceeds from that sale are entirely hers. But what about the family support during her childhood? Judge Chen asked. That's what parents are legally required to provide. Your Honor, the law doesn't recognize a debt relationship between parents who fulfill their obligations and adult children who become successful. If it did, every parent could sue their grown children for reimbursement of childhood expenses. Judge Chen turned to my parents' attorney. Mr. Garrett, do you have any legal precedent for requiring an adult sibling to fund another sibling's business venture? Garrett fumbled through his papers. Your Honor, we believe this falls under unjust enrichment statutes. How is Ms. Thompson enriched by her sister's failed business prospects? She's enriched by her family's historical support, which enabled her current financial position. Judge Chen was clearly losing patience. That's not how unjust enrichment works. Counselor. The judge asked my parents and Rose if they wanted to make statements. Dad stood up and launched into a speech about family loyalty and how disappointed he was in my selfishness. Mom cried about Rose's artistic dreams being crushed. Rose took the stand and painted herself as a victim of my cruelty. All I wanted was a chance to build something beautiful. I had investors lined up, artists ready to show their work, and a real business plan. My sister chose money over family. When Judge Chen asked me to respond, I kept it simple. Your Honor, I worked hard for my money, and I have the right to decide how to invest it. No one is entitled to my savings just because we're related. The judge deliberated for exactly 12 minutes. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you are ordered to pay defendants' legal costs within 30 days. This court will not be used to settle family financial disputes that have no basis in law. As we walked out of the courthouse, Marcus was grinning. That was even easier than I expected. Your parents just learned a very expensive lesson about frivolous lawsuits. I felt relieved, but also empty. My own family had tried to destroy me in court, and I'd had to prove in front of a judge that I had the right to keep money I'd earned through my own hard work. The fact that this even required legal defense showed how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. Walking to my car, I realized this wasn't really about Rose's gallery anymore. This was about control, about whether I was going to let my family dictate my financial decisions for the rest of my life. Today's ruling had settled that question definitively. I was finally truly free to make my own choices with my own money. The price of that freedom had been higher than I'd ever imagined. The victory felt hollow as I watched my family file out of the courtroom. Rose was crying openly, and Mom had her arm around her like she was the victim of some great injustice. Dad wouldn't even look at me. Marcus handed me the official court order. They have 30 days to pay your legal fees, $8,400 total. If they don't pay, we can garnish wages or put liens on their property. What are the chances they'll actually pay given what I saw in their financial records, Slim? They're already overextended. But that's their problem now. I drove home in a daze trying to process what had just happened. I'd won completely. The judge had dismissed their case with prejudice, which meant they couldn't file the same lawsuit again. But winning meant that the relationship with my family was probably over forever. My phone started ringing before I even got home. First Mom, then Dad, then Rose. I let them all go to voicemail. Mom's message was tearful. Lily, I can't believe you let it go this far. We're your family. How could you do this to us? Dad's was angry. You got what you wanted. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family over money. Rose's was the longest and most dramatic. Congratulations. You won. You successfully crushed your sister's dreams and tore apart our family. I hope your precious money keeps you warm at night, because you'll never have us again. That evening, my friend Cassie from work came over with wine and Chinese food. She'd been following the whole saga for months. How are you feeling? She asked as we settled on my couch. Honestly relieved and sad and angry. It's complicated. Your family sued you for not giving them money. There's nothing complicated about that being insane. Cassie was right, but it didn't make the pain go away. These were the people who'd raised me, who'd been at my nursing school graduation, who I'd thought would always be part of my life. The worst part is that they made me the villain I said. In their minds, I'm the selfish daughter who chose money over family. They can't see that they chose Rose's fantasy over my financial security. The court order required my parents to pay my legal fees within 30 days. But I knew they didn't have the money. Their financial records had shown maxed out credit cards and loans taken against their house. They'd already spent more on this lawsuit than Rose's gallery had made in its entire brief existence. 3 weeks later, Marcus called with an update. They're requesting a payment plan. They want to pay your legal fees at $200 per month. That would take over 3 years. Exactly. You can accept it, or we can proceed with asset seizure. Given their financial situation, they probably can't come up with a lump sum. I agreed to the payment plan. I was done fighting with them, and I didn't want to be responsible for them losing their house. But the real consequence of the lawsuit wasn't financial. It was the complete breakdown of family relationships. Word spread through our extended family about the court case. Aunt Patricia stopped speaking to me entirely. Cousin Jake unfriended me on social media. Even family friends started treating me differently when they saw me around town. The narrative that emerged wasn't parents sue daughter for refusing to fund risky business venture. It was selfish daughter destroys family rather than helps sister's art gallery. Rose played the victim perfectly on social media, posting vague messages about family betrayal and people who choose money over love. She never mentioned that she'd been part of a lawsuit demanding $120,000 from me, just that I'd refused to support her dreams. Meanwhile, her gallery continued its predictable decline. Without proper foot traffic or business experience, Rose was burning through the money my parents had borrowed. The last few pieces of artwork sat unsold in a space that looked more desperate with each passing week. I tried not to feel vindicated by her failure, but it was hard not to notice that every prediction I'd made was coming true. The location was wrong, the business model was flawed, and Rose had no idea how to run a retail operation. 6 months after the trial, I closed on my duplex. The rental income from the upstairs unit covered most of my mortgage, and I was building equity while living in a beautiful space I'd chosen and could afford. I'd won the war, but the cost was higher than I'd expected. Financial independence felt less triumphant when you had no family to share it with. Still, every month when I made my mortgage payment and deposited my tenant's rent check, I knew I'd made the right choice. My family had tried to destroy my financial security to fund Rose's delusion, and I'd refused to let them. That had to be enough. Rose's gallery closed on a Wednesday in September, exactly 8 months after opening. I heard about it from Cassie, who'd driven past the strip mall and seen the fist sign in the window. The space is completely empty, she told me during our lunch break. No art, no furniture, nothing. It looks like they cleared out in a hurry. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was vindicated. I'd been right about the business model being unsustainable, but another part felt genuinely sad for Rose. Whatever her flaws, she had genuinely believed in her gallery dream. The financial details emerged over the following weeks through mutual friends and social media posts. Rose had burned through the initial $40,000 my parents borrowed within 6 months. Rent, utilities, insurance, and the cost of purchasing artwork had eaten up the money faster than she'd anticipated. Her sales had been dismal. According to someone who'd visited the gallery, Rose had sold maybe $3,000 worth of art in 8 months. Most of those sales were small pieces to family friends who'd bought them out of pity rather than genuine interest. The bigger problem was inventory. Rose had spent over $20,000 buying artwork from various artists, promising them gallery representation and profit sharing. When the gallery failed, she still owed money to 6 different artists and had no way to pay them back. The strip mall landlord had given her 2 months' notice for unpaid rent. Rather than declare bankruptcy or try to negotiate a payment plan, Rose had simply abandoned the space, leaving behind several pieces of unsold artwork and unpaid debts. My parents were facing the financial fallout. They'd borrowed $35,000 against their house for Rose's initial investment, plus another $15,000 on credit cards for additional expenses. They still owed Marcus $8,400 for my legal fees, which they were paying at $200 per month as agreed. But the real crisis was their mortgage. With Rose unemployed and living at home again, my parents were struggling to make their house payments. Dad was 61 and working at a warehouse job that was getting harder on his body. Mom had taken a part-time position at a department store, but their combined income barely covered their expanded debt load. I learned these details through my former neighbor, Mrs. Kim, who'd stayed in touch after I moved. She'd run into my mother at the grocery store and came away concerned about the family's financial situation. "Your mom looked exhausted," Mrs. Kim told me over coffee. She mentioned they might have to sell the house. That hit me harder than I'd expected. The house had been my childhood home for 15 years. It was where I'd studied for nursing school exams at the kitchen table, where I'd celebrated getting my first job, where I'd lived until I could afford my own place. But I also knew that selling the house was probably the smart financial move. They could pay off their debts and downsize to something more affordable. The problem was that admitting they needed to sell would mean acknowledging that funding Rose's gallery had been a catastrophic mistake. Rose herself had gone completely silent on social media. No more posts about artistic vision or business ventures. Her last Instagram post was a cryptic message about learning from failure and reassessing priorities. Through the nursing community, grapevine, I heard she'd applied for jobs at several coffee shops and retail stores. The art world career she'd been so confident about had evaporated along with her gallery. 3 months after the gallery closed, I got an unexpected phone call from Dad. It was the first time we'd spoken since the courthouse. "Lily, we need to talk." His voice sounded older, more defeated than I'd ever heard it. "About what about?" "About everything. We're in trouble, and I think you might have been right about some things. The admission must have cost him." Dad had never been good at apologizing or acknowledging mistakes. "What kind of trouble?" "We're going to lose the house. The mortgage company started foreclosure proceedings last week. We can't keep up with all the debt payments." I felt a stab of sympathy, followed immediately by anger. They'd created the situation by choosing Rose's fantasy over financial reality. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad. Are you really?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you were right about the gallery. You were right about Rose not being ready. You were right about us not being able to afford it. So part of you must be satisfied that we're getting what we deserve." I considered lying, telling him I took no pleasure in their financial collapse, but we were past the point of comfortable family lies. "I'm not happy you're losing your house, but I'm not surprised either. You borrowed money you couldn't afford to lose on a business plan that never made sense." I know the words came out quietly. We thought it would work out somehow. We thought Rose would figure it out, or that you'd come around and help, or that something would save us." "Hope isn't a financial strategy, Dad." "No, it's not." Dad's phone call was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, my family launched what I can only describe as a reconciliation campaign designed to soften me up for the real ask. Mom called first, her voice shaky and apologetic. "Lily, honey, I know we made mistakes. The lawsuit was wrong, and I'm sorry we put you through that. Families shouldn't fight over money." She talked about how much she missed me, how empty the house felt without me visiting, how she regretted letting things get so out of hand. It was a masterful performance that might have worked if I hadn't been through months of manipulation. Rose came next, sending a handwritten letter to my duplex. The letter was 3 pages of carefully crafted apologies mixed with subtle self-justification. She was sorry for the lawsuit, sorry for the family conflict, but she wanted me to understand that her gallery dream had come from a genuine place of artistic passion. I know I wasn't ready for the business side of things, she wrote. I was naive about what it would take to succeed, but the dream itself wasn't wrong, just the timing and execution. The letter ended with an invitation to lunch just to talk and start healing our relationship. I threw the letter away. The campaign intensified when they realized I wasn't responding to emotional appeals. Aunt Patricia called, claiming she'd been misinformed about the family conflict and wanted to hear my side of the story. Cousin Jake sent a Facebook message about how much he valued family unity, but the real desperation became clear when Mrs. Kim called me at work. "Your parents came by my house yesterday asking for your work schedule. She said they wanted to know what time you got home and whether you were dating anyone. It felt strange. Strange how, like they were planning something. Your mother kept asking if I thought you seemed lonely living by yourself. That evening, I came home to find my entire family sitting in their car in my driveway. When they saw me pull up, they got out and approached my front door like a delegation. "We just want to talk," Mom said before I could object. "That's all." Against my better judgment, I let them inside. They arranged themselves on my couch like they were staging an intervention, with Rose looking appropriately repentant and my parents wearing their most serious expressions. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," Dad began. "About the family, about money, about priorities. We realized we handled everything wrong," Mom added. "The pressure, the lawsuit, all of it. We were just so scared about losing the house and disappointing Rose." Rose spoke up, her voice carefully modulated. "I take full responsibility for my business failing. I wasn't prepared, and I let my emotions override common sense. The gallery was a mistake." I listened to their carefully rehearsed speeches, waiting for the real purpose of their visit. "The thing is," Dad continued, "we're in a really bad spot financially. The foreclosure is moving forward, and we'll probably lose the house within 60 days, but we've learned from our mistakes," Mom said quickly. "We're not asking you to bail us out or give us money. We know we don't deserve that after everything that happened." Rose leaned forward earnestly. "We just want our family back. We want to rebuild relationships and trust." They kept talking about family healing and learning from mistakes, but I could sense the underlying agenda. Finally, Dad got to the point. "We've been looking at smaller places to rent, and we found a really nice duplex across town. The thing is, the landlord wants first month last month and a security deposit up front, about $4,500 total." There it was. "We were wondering," Mom said carefully, "if you might consider co-signing the lease. Not paying for anything, just co-signing, so they'll approve our application." Rose added, "It would really help us get back on our feet without asking you for money directly." I stared at them, amazed by their audacity. They'd sued me for $120,000, spent a year trying to destroy my financial security, and now they wanted me to co-sign a lease that would make me legally responsible for their rent payments. "You want me to co-sign a lease?" I said slowly. "For people who just demonstrated they can't manage money responsibly." "We've learned our lesson," Dad insisted. "This time will be different. If you've learned your lesson, you won't need a co-signer. Lily, please." Mom said, tears starting. "We have nowhere else to turn. We'll lose everything. You already lost everything when you decided to sue me instead of accepting that Rose's gallery was a bad investment." Rose's carefully constructed humility cracked. "So you're just going to let us become homeless? Your own family? You're not going to be homeless. You're going to face the consequences of your financial decisions, which might include renting a cheaper place that doesn't require a cosigner." I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "I'm not co-signing anything. I'm not lending money, and I'm not responsible for fixing the mess you created." They left without saying goodbye, and I knew this reconciliation attempt had been their last desperate play. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Kim called to tell me they'd moved out of the house in the middle of the night, leaving no forwarding address. 2 years have passed since that final confrontation in my living room, and my life has transformed in ways I never expected. I'm writing this from the sunroom of my duplex, where I've set up a small office space overlooking the garden I planted last spring. The investment strategy I'd planned from the beginning worked exactly as I'd hoped. My tenant upstairs, Jake, is a graduate student who pays $1,200 monthly in rent, which covers most of my mortgage payment. The equity I'm building, combined with the rental income, has given me financial security I never thought possible. 6 months ago, I made the decision to transition to freelance nursing. I work with 3 different agencies, picking up shifts at hospitals across the city when I want them. The flexibility is incredible. I can work intensively for a few weeks, then take time off to travel or pursue other interests. My housing costs are so low that I don't need the traditional full-time job security most people require. I use some of my remaining savings to take a course in medical writing, and I've started doing freelance work for healthcare publications. It turns out that combining nursing experience with writing skills is quite valuable in today's market. I'm making more money working fewer hours than I ever did in traditional hospital employment. The duplex itself has become a real home. I renovated the kitchen last year, adding granite countertops and stainless appliances. The backyard garden produces enough vegetables to supply both units. And I've started a small herb business selling to local restaurants. Every improvement I make increases the property value, creating a positive cycle of investment and return. As for my family, I've pieced together their story through occasional updates from mutual acquaintances and Mrs. Kim, who stays in touch despite their abrupt departure. They lost the house to foreclosure as expected. The bank sold it at auction for less than they owed, leaving them with additional debt. They ended up renting a small apartment in a complex across town, paying month to month because no landlord would approve them for a lease given their credit situation. Dad was forced to take early retirement when his warehouse job became too physically demanding. At 63, he's collecting reduced Social Security benefits and working part-time at a hardware store. Mom is still at the department store, but they're struggling to make ends meet on their reduced income. Rose moved back in with them after the gallery failed, but that arrangement lasted only 6 months. According to Mrs. Kim, there were constant arguments about money and responsibility. Rose eventually moved in with a boyfriend she'd met online, but that relationship ended badly when he discovered her debt situation. The last I heard, Rose was working at a coffee shop downtown and living in a studio apartment she can barely afford. She's 36 now with no career prospects, significant debt, and a resume that includes an 8-month failed business venture as her only entrepreneurial experience. They still owe Marcus $3,200 in legal fees from the lawsuit. They've been making the $200 monthly payments irregularly, and he's had to send several demand letters. I told him not to pursue garnishment. I just want them to meet their obligation even if it takes years. The most telling detail came from Mrs. Kim's last update. My parents have been telling people that I abandoned the family during their time of need. Even now, facing the consequences of their own financial decisions, they can't accept that they created this situation by demanding I fund Rose's unrealistic dream. I don't feel vindicated by their struggles, but I don't feel guilty either. Every choice they made, from pressuring me to invest in the gallery to filing that ridiculous lawsuit, was designed to transfer their financial problems onto me. I refuse to participate in that transfer, and they're dealing with the natural consequences. My life now is exactly what I'd hoped for when I sold that first apartment. I have security, flexibility, and independence. I'm building wealth steadily through real estate investment while pursuing work that interests me. I travel when I want to spend money on things that matter to me and sleep well knowing my financial foundation is solid. The cost was higher than I'd expected. I essentially lost my entire family. But looking back, I realized that the family relationships I lost were built on my willingness to sacrifice my own interest for theirs. Once I stopped doing that, there was nothing left to sustain the connection. Sometimes I wonder if Rose could have succeeded with a different business model, better location, and realistic expectations. But that's not the business she wanted to run. She wanted to skip the hard work of building experience and jump straight to being a successful gallery owner funded by someone else's money. I chose financial security over family harmony, and I'll never regret that choice. My family tried to make me responsible for their financial problems, and I refused. 2 years later, I'm thriving while they're still dealing with the consequences of trying to build dreams on someone else's foundation. Independence isn't just about having money. It's about having the courage to protect what you've built, even when the people you love are asking you to destroy.